Okay, welcome to our 121st Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar. And we have a first today. We have a late substitution, so a bit like sometimes happens in the football when in the warm-up someone is injured and they have to be replaced in the starting lineup. Oliver Budzinski couldn't make it today. He's ill, unfortunately. And thankfully, he had a substitute ready, co-author Arne Feddersen, who is ready to present their paper on demand for TV broadcasts of UEFA Champions League games in Danish television. I am not going to list all the various upcoming conferences in person that we can get to in the course of the year, but you can find information about them all. Conferences in Paderborn, Gijón, Budapest, Cork, amongst other places, New York as well, I think. I can't remember for the Westerns, but do look up those details, make sure you don't miss abstract deadlines, and we will hopefully all be seeing each other in person over the course of the coming year. Arne, you've got the usual hour or so, take as long as you need pretty much. People might interrupt you with questions and there should be some time for Q&A at the end, but the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. As James already said, there was relatively short notice, so I think it was something like 10:30 p.m. yesterday evening that Oliver sent me an email. So he has some issues with his voice, and he actually intended to do the presentation, but his doctor, and I hope that's not too much information, but the doctor said no way, he should not do this. And so, yeah, that's of course a short notice. I had some exams this morning, so a little bit short time preparation, but I hope that I will do honor to my two co-authors. And of course, any mistake which appears in this presentation is solely mine and should not reflect to the other two. Also, I don't know, probably you will not hear this. So since I'm living on an island in the North Sea and we have quite a windy day today, there might be some wind sounds. I hope that you either will not hear it at all or it will not be distracting. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so our paper on the demand for TV broadcasts of UEFA Champions League games on Danish television is, let's say, the main motivation we have, or the main motivation of this paper is actually the ongoing discussion about the European Super League and UEFA, and so when this the European Super League kind of concept was published, and the immediately response from UEFA, of course, was to have very strict reaction to this, trying to or threatening to ban those teams from at that time still running Champions League season, banning them for the next Champions League season, and also threatening, for example, the players that they will not be eligible for playing in the national teams. So that was in a way the setup. And one of the arguments, of course, if it is, and that's what we have at the time, so you might know this, that right now the case is in front of the European Court of Justice. We have had the hearings in, I think, September of last year. The General Advocate put out his opinion shortly before Christmas, which I think from at least a sports economics and competition economics policies standpoint, there are quite some questionable conclusions in that opinion, I think. So now we're waiting for the final ruling by the court. And of course, in these antitrust cases, if there is anti-competitive behavior, then there might be the case that if it benefits consumers, that of course exemptions from the general rules can be made. So very kind of short summary of what's going on in competition policy. And so that in a way led to our research idea and the research question, which maybe might also be a little bit inspired by that one of those main arguments brought forward by the organizers of the Super League, so the Spanish sports marketing agency A22, together with the 12 clubs at that time. And one of their main argument was that that their concept would offer to the consumers a league which kind of shows already in the early phase of the competition much more interesting games, so much more matchups between the biggest teams. So, and of course in their argumentation they say that's what the consumers want to see. So that's in a way the starting point for our paper, that we looked into this and thought, okay, that from both perspectives might be a very interesting and relevant question to be solved in order to assess whether we have a situation where there might be some large benefits for the consumers by restricting competition or not. And so this then in a way might lead to even kind of a higher level question to ask, so how should Europe's highest level of football or sports in general be organized? There's of course now a very kind of intense discussion going on about gatekeeper roles and dual roles and the incentive problems which are associated with this. If someone is interested in this, maybe you can make a short plug that Oliver and I, we have a book chapter on the kind of the future of European sports governance, very recently published, where we look a little bit into the competition policy and sports economics aspects of the league organization. So findings from this research, of course, have influenced, inspired that. Yeah. So our general question in a way is, what do fans actually want? And so if we look into the literature, and of course I know, but just looking in the list of the participants, that I do not have to go too deep into this literature. Of course, many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the uncertainty of outcome hypothesis, although there's a typo, and superstar effects and kind of home win preferences, local hero effects in sport. And so, of course, so we have the kind of the starting point of the debate about uncertainty of outcome and competitive balance, Rothenberg, Neal, and so on. And then we focused a little bit on TV, papers on TV demand. And of course, here we have only a selection of those papers. The closely related paper to ours is so the Wills, Tekken, and Odessa paper in the European Sports Management Quarterly 2020, and they have analyzed TV demand for broadcast of the Champions League in, and I think in the big five leagues, so in England, Germany, Spain, France, and Italy. So while our approach here now is to say, okay, yes, that's true that those are really big markets. However, if we are especially in a case in front of the European Court of Justice, then of course it's not just about the consumers in those big countries, but it's also, of course, how might different ideas of organizing such a top-level pan-European competition, do we focus more on kind of a broader participation and a little bit more kind of country balance, geographical balance, at least at the group stages of the tournament, which would be kind of then maybe the Champions League format as it is right now, or do consumers identify more with the big teams and want to see this and gain more utility out of that. And so in this sense, I think we have identified that probably the Wills, Tekon, and Dessa paper together with our paper give a very kind of interesting view on this, because in their paper they can show that it's kind of a little bit driven by what we maybe later on discuss as the whatever local hero team or home win preference kind of type, where they can, or they show that in those big countries there's more interest in the teams from that country and maybe not so much interest into kind of the more balanced games between the big teams. And so our approach to this is, and that's why we think that Denmark is a very good example, which is could probably be a placeholder for a lot of other smaller European countries, especially with respect to their football leagues, which of course can be other Scandinavian leagues, the Finnish league, the Polish league, the whatever, Austria, Switzerland, and so on. Because this is a stereotype or kind of an example of a league which has relatively low participation in the Champions League. Yeah? So it's the Danish champion that normally, so with respect to the 5-year ranking, so Denmark is in a place where the champion is not automatically qualified for the Champions League, but has to go into the qualification for the Champions League. And so there are also in our data set, and also historically seen, a couple of, or quite a number of seasons where actually there were no Danish team involved at all. Then there are a couple of seasons where the Danish champion qualified for the Champions League, and with, I think, maybe one exception, the group stage is normally the end for the Danish champion. So, which kind of for us gives a very nice study environment to see, okay, so how do fans from a country where the champion and even more teams like for the big teams are participating regularly and also relatively long into the competition, how do they kind of think about uncertainty of outcome and kind of the local team, national team, or domestic team influence on this. And so our main focus, while of course looking for other of the very typical variables, and I will come to the list of the variables later on, we focus on these 3 main aspects. So the uncertainty of outcome, then general superstar effects, and this is both on the team level. So we, in a way, try to define something like a superstar team, and then independent of that, looked at individual superstar players, whether they might drive demand or not. And then finally is the question about do kind of local heroes, domestic heroes in this case, so the Danish champion, does this kind of drive demand for Danish TV audiences? And I think this discussion, maybe looking at our paper compared to the Wills, Tekon, and the Dessa paper, reminds me a little bit in the discussion with respect to stadium attendance, for example, which we find in of course also because it's part of the formal model in the Coates, Humphreys, and Zhu preference, the economic inquiry paper, and of course also already in some TV audience papers from Rob Simmons, for example, Well, of course, the discussion for stadium attendance is that at least for European teams, probably it's the same for the North American ones, that of course, because of the fact that fans of a team quite often have this geographic proximity to the location of the club, that even if there might be some form of a preference for uncertainty, this might not be on a econometric level. We might not be able to distinguish this from the uncertainty of outcome and reference dependent preferences. And then the discussion, of course, is that maybe TV audiences, if we look at league games, for example, give a better example, because, of course, there is not really a home team if we broadcast a game nationwide. So, and this is a little bit what we think if we look into the broadcasts of Champions League games and the big leagues, then we will probably have a much higher dominance of these domestic team effects compared, which would be kind of the home team win preference equivalent, I think, and compare this to a smaller country like Denmark. Yeah. So I hope that I made it relatively clear what our idea behind this is, and also why we think that Denmark and Danish TV audiences as relatively neutral audiences with respect to broadcast of the Champions League might be a well-suited case to look into. Okay, so our data is the number of TV viewers of broadcasts, as I mentioned a couple of times, of UEFA Champions League games in Denmark. So in Denmark, TV ratings, TV viewer numbers are collected by Kantar Media. It's based on a representative panel of 1,200 Danish households. So our data, which spans from the season 2005-2006 to 18-19, which has to one extent, mainly the reason that this is when we that's the longest time period. So until the season 18-19, where we got access to the data. But I don't think that is also too bad, because maybe the COVID lockdown ghost game effects could have introduced some biases into our analysis. And so if we look at the graph, then it's very typical. So this is just the dates of the games, and of course you see the winter and the summer break where there were no games, and then we have the rating in 1,000 viewers here, and we can in a way kind of nicely see that we have some kind of moderate viewership for group stages and so on, and that then towards the end of each of the season, higher TV ratings can be found. Just to give a brief overview of the descriptive statistics, we have here divided it into the group stage games, the round of last 16, the quarterfinal, semifinal, and then the final. And again, it's viewers in 1,000. Yeah. So for the group stage games, the average is 120,000 Danes, and maybe also for you to as a benchmark, as a reference point. So overall, Denmark has, I think, roughly 5.8 million inhabitants. So group stages on average 120,000 viewers, and then going into the knockout rounds, going from 260 to whatever 320,000, and then 650,000 to over 1 million on average for the final. So with respect to our independent variables, as I said, we use, inspired by the existing literature, the kind of very usual variables. So we use the home win probability as a measure of uncertainty of outcome. And of course, in the model, we use the bookmaker probabilities, so we control for the overround and use those implied probabilities in the absolute level and the squared level in order to then control for whether we have uncertainty of outcome hypothesis or evidence for the uncertainty of outcome hypothesis if we find the inverse U shape. Or, for example, find evidence for dependent reference for loss aversion. If we again look in the Coates, Humphreys, and Zhu paper, where we then would find the U-shaped version of this. We then, of course, focus on superstars and market values of the teams. So for that purpose, we have scraped the market values from transfermarkt.de and have as one variable build the commu. So we have summed it up, and for superstars we have built a dummy variable if there were players in the 1% percentile of the market value distribution. So local heroes, that's what we kind of are labeling for the domestic teams. So it's a dummy variable one if a Danish team participated in that specific game. Local heroes is when a Danish player, or that is the number of Danish players in any game. Because here it could be the effect that there are Danish players playing for whatever, a German team and an English team, and if those two teams play against each other, then of course there could be an interest of Danish TV audiences because Danish players are involved in a game, although the team is not. None of the two teams is Danish. Then we have a variable for a domestic team. So again, as I said, this is the dummy variable one if we have a Danish team in that matchup and zero after or otherwise. And then finally, we have some control variables where we look for the stage of the events. This is a group stage or one of the knockout rounds, the TV channel, weather variables, so temperature and precipitation, the day of the week, kickoff time, and we use a couple of fixed effects in our regression later on. Yeah, so that's our regression model, where we use the log of the number of TV viewers. Again, we have home win probability and home win probability squared. We have the accumulated market value of the two teams, the number of superstars involved in the team. So again, this is the number of players that are on the 1% percentile of the market value distribution on the player level. Local heroes is a variable if, again, Danish players are involved in a matchup independent of whether a Danish team is involved or not. And then domestic, again, dummy variable if it is a Danish team or not. Substitute, we're looking at other kind of TV events that could take place at the same time. Then we look at the temperature.
This really sucks. I don't know what you get.
Was it a question, Brad, or?
I think James may have.
Okay. So shall I just go on? Okay.
I mean, I guess if either Brad or James did want to ask a question, they should feel able to. I remuted their microphone.
Okay, good. So then I will just go on. Yeah, so then we have the temperature. That's of course relatively difficult to calculate if we look at the national-wide audiences. On the other hand, Denmark is not a really big country, so it's probably something like, and I've seen Erasmus is in the audience, so maybe he will correct me afterwards, but probably something like 400 kilometers in each of the directions. So it's probably 4 hours driving from north to south and from west to east, which of course there can be temperature differences. And so what we've decided to do is we've taken the temperature and precipitation values measured at the airport in Odense, which is in a way the biggest city, which is in, so it's a bigger city which is located more or less in the geographic center of Denmark. And so temperature, that's in degrees Celsius, and then precipitation is rainfall in millimeters. Stage is a set of dummy variables for the competition. So as I said, group stage, round of 16, quarterfinal, semifinal, and final. Channel is available for the TV channel, day of the week, kickoff time, and then we have home team and away team and seasonal fixed effects. Okay, here we have our results. So we have the kind of the first 3 columns with respect to the results. It's just that we have added some additional variables to this, and then the difference between the column 3 and column 4 is that we have tried some a different measure for the market value of teams, so it's kind of the superstar super team effect. So while in the first 3 models we've used the kind of accumulated market values of both teams, and in the 4th column we've used the ranking in the UEFA club ranking as an alternative measure. Yeah, so I think it's interesting to see if we just look at the first variable, so the market value combined, or the accumulated market value, that we have a significant and positive impact of the combined market value of the 2 teams with respect to demand. If we then look at, for example, the uncertainty of outcome hypothesis as a test, so we have at least in 2 of the 4 models, we have weak evidence on, or weakness significance with a positive value for the home win probability, and a negative significant or weak significant value for the home win probability squared, which gives some kind of very weak evidence for a inverse U-shaped form, and so in this regard, some again very weak evidence that maybe Champions League for Danish TV viewers, that they prefer uncertain, that they have an uncertainty of outcome preferences. And then if we look into some of the control variables, so again, like we find in all of these studies, it's quite obvious that the round of the competition has a strong influence on demand. And so we have then, as I said, used some fixed effects on broadcaster and home team and away team, and so on. So maybe very quickly, if we look at just the home win probability picture and look at our fitted values, then we can see this slightly U-shaped, inverse U-shaped version. And just to kind of highlight this against this, that we have the paper by Brad and Levy, where they look at La Liga broadcasts in Spain, where they find the U-shape. So in this case, reference-dependent preferences and loss aversion. And I would actually, I don't think that these results are really kind of working against each other, because again, we need to understand that on the right side with Brad's and Levy's paper, we have the national Spanish league broadcasted in Spain. And especially, and I don't want to go too much into detail, but if you can see it here, then you have the darker dots and the lighter dots. And the darker dots, if I'm not mistaken, are games involving Real Madrid and FC Barcelona, and the gray ones are without them. Also showing that because of this, also maybe the peculiarity in Spain, at least based on talking to people in Spain, that a lot of Spanish people, independent of their geographic location, might be a fan of Real or Barcelona. And so which means that here we might have other effects than just the uncertainty of outcome hypothesis, which dominate the outcome here, while, as I mentioned in our outcome, since for a large portion of the games there is no Danish team involved, and so which means that maybe the effects, the counter effects from for example home win preferences might be much lower in our setup. Okay, so what might be then the conclusion out of this? So if we look into what we find in the sense quite different results from what we see for broadcast of national league competitions, and also then this UEFA Champions League paper, Wills et al., where we find that we find some evidence for that uncertainty of outcome matters, and especially that also superstars, so superstar clubs matter. So the accumulated market value of the teams is a very strong driver of demand, and this of course has some implications for what we have talked about at the beginning, because if we now look at the question of does the European consumer actually benefit from more games between the top teams, or does the European consumer prefer and benefit more from kind of a broader involvement of European teams? And at least with respect to our sample, so Danish TV audiences for the last couple of seasons, we can here say that, okay, it's probably more beneficial for Danish TV audiences if there are not so many, from their perspective, relatively uninteresting games. So where maybe a team from Portugal plays against a team from the Czech Republic. No offense to those teams, but from the perspective of the Danish TV audiences, does not seem to be as attractive as a game of the top teams would be. So there might be, and of course that might now be actually also gives a lot of room for discussions, because we could now argue that, okay, maybe we should have with respect to smaller countries, and again, it's so far only evidence from Denmark, and it would be very nice to see similar papers with TV figures from other smaller European countries to see whether kind of a similar effect can be found there, in contrast to what we might find in the big leagues. because of course that would have quite an important quite important implications for any form of competition policy weighting of this argument. Yeah, so I think that's where I would kind of leave it. So I think it's interesting results, and I would, although of course it is interesting in itself, at least for us, I think a good amount of the motivation comes from embedding this into the discussion about how the governance structure of European football should look like, and what are valid arguments brought forward from UEFA and maybe politicians to keep the status quo of this quite highly strong position of the market internal regulator, which was UEFA in this case, to what could be other other models of governance.
Great, thanks, Arne. Alex has leapt in with his hand up, so I'm going to hand over to Alex straight away.
So thank you, Arne. Good to see you. Can you go to the slides of the results, because I might miss something? So the third one, if I'm not mistaken. So the this uncertainty of outcome, home win probability, and its square term. If I understand correctly, for some reason, the optimum is above 100%. If I read it correctly, right? Yes. No? Yeah. Yeah. So maybe something is going on in this specification that should not go on. Right?
Okay. Yeah, I will have a look into this.
And in general, this raises another question. What should be the specification when we use this home win probability and its square term? What should we include there? Because, you know, there are so many things that correlate with each other, and what's the right specification? $1 million question.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Alex. In principle, I guess the if you include those two effects, they should give you the effect having conditioned on your other explanatory variables.
Yeah, but then what's the meaning of this figure then, of the U shape or inverse U shape? Like, what's?
I don't know whether, Arne, the fact that the coefficients change quite a bit in that specification due to the fixed effects at all, but then you've got the same fixed effects for your final column, haven't you?
Yeah.
Which just changes the MV to UEFA variable. Yeah, I mean, I say in principle, Alex, you know, usually in practice it doesn't work out in principle, right? So.
Yeah, it's a while that I personally have worked with the data, so I will have. It's a good point.
I left straight to go to Alex because it might have been that he had to leave early. But just to say a thank you to you, Arne, really interesting presentation given at short notice. And we've got plenty of time for questions and comments. So if anyone does want to put forward any questions or comments to Arne, please do put your hands up and ask away or comment away. Did I read it correct that there's no local hero effects? Arne, is that right? Danes don't really care to watch Danish players in the Champions League.
Yeah. That's
Seems a bit
because, yeah, I think so far, and that might be a point to improve. So far, we have just counted them. So it might actually be that we need to kind of weight it by the market value of something. Let's see that whether they care more about or kind of make a kind of an interaction with being a national team player or something like that. But these things can get very tricky very soon with respect to just kind of identifying all the players and yeah, but that is a good point to maybe look into this. But I'm not completely surprised about this because it's not that Denmark has so many world stars. They have a couple of course, relatively good players, and probably still Eriksen is one of the bigger examples from the last couple of years in our example, and but at least in our models, this doesn't show any kind of significant effect.
Yeah, yeah. Dennis.
Hey, Arne.
Hi.
Thanks for the presentation. You use this variable that's the sum of the market values of the two clubs, and I understand why you're using it. I have a little bit of problem with the variable. It seems to me that there's lots of interpretations one could give to that. And for example, when I think about which clubs are people interested in watching, well, they're the clubs that they've heard about for years and years and years. And which clubs are those going to be? Those are going to be the clubs with really big market values. I'm not interested in watching a Czech club in the Champions League because I don't know anything about the Czech clubs. And so I don't know if you're really capturing, I'm not sure what you're really capturing with that variable. Is it like historical familiarity? Is it the brand, so to speak, of the clubs?
Mm-hmm.
Is it general popularity? I don't really have a good answer to what that is, but I think there's many things it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be really great if you could find some way to, I don't know, include other variables that might capture some of the possible other stories that one could tell about this variable, or that this variable might capture.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. So that is on the one hand, I think, of course, a good thing, and we will look into this. On the other hand, just a question: if we just want to answer this question with respect to maybe the competition policy argument about this, where we say, don't we really care whether it's the brand or the familiarity or things like this? Just kind of consumers benefit from watching those teams and not those teams they are not familiar with.
Yeah, I mean, but then isn't it a self-fulfilling prophecy that the only clubs you're ever going to see are the clubs that are already big because you don't have any interest in the clubs you don't know anything about? I mean,
Yeah.
it's anointing the anointed in a way.
Mm.
And I think it would be fascinating to see if you did this same study in the Czech Republic, what would you get from that, since there would be such a different experience with the big clubs, having been behind the Iron Curtain for a good chunk of history. And I mean, just very interesting kinds of things to do there.
Yeah.
And I have one other question. It's sort of a thought about what Alex said. I didn't notice how the probabilities are, home win probabilities, are they stated in terms of percentages, or are they stated in terms of decimals, proportions?
I guess decimals.
Okay, then the coefficient of 1.9 or whatever is maybe a bigger issue than if it was.
Yeah,
or is
I
it the other way
I
around?
have to check. That's,
The scale is relevant there, and I don't
Yeah.
know what the scale is.
Yeah.
So thank you, Arne.
Thanks, Dennis.
Dennis? More questions and comments? Well, looks like we might not have any more, which... Nope, there we go, Stefan.
Yeah, hi Arne. I guess my feeling about this literature in general is that it's really hard to, and I think it goes back to what Dennis was saying in some way, and Alex as well. It's just the identification problem is really huge here. I mean, there are so many things about what might make a game attractive, and these could all be tied up with whatever measure of uncertainty of outcome you try to apply. Since in some sense, you know, for each game, there's no variation in the uncertainty of outcome. Although actually, when the game is played, there is huge variation in the uncertainty of outcome. And so that's I think where one can really hope to identify if there is such a thing as the uncertainty of outcome hypothesis, or well, there is such a thing. But if it really actually plays a role in determining demand, I think the way you'll capture it is by looking at the evolution of viewership over the game. So I think what you really want is how does the number of viewers change as the game progresses, as the uncertainty changes. So, you know, do we see a huge drop off in viewership once Real Madrid's up 5-0 in 10 minutes, and so suddenly we know what the outcome's going to be, or do people hang on? So I just think that these looking at just the game level on its own is just not is unlikely to really tell us in any reliable way how fans are affected by uncertainty of outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is a valid point. I think, but it's a little bit. I have to look into this, but to some of the data, I have access to minute by minute ratings. So that's, but of course, that kind of gives the demand for the computational part and the things is much higher. But yeah, it's a good point. I will check whether I have those numbers for these games. Otherwise, I will probably a good idea to anyway look into getting hold of them.
Thanks, Stefan. Any more questions and comments? Alex Farnell.
Yeah, hi Arne. That was very interesting. I just kind of had a comment in terms of the policy here. You kind of framed it as the talking about the Super League and the fact that we have these market values. If we have high combined market values, people are more likely to watch. I don't know if that's kind of a novelty effect, that one year you would see Bayern Munich PSG, the next year you would see Bayern Munich Real Madrid. But the next year, if you saw Bayern play PSG all the time, that kind of might wear off. So I don't know. I don't know whether you thought there was a
that's actually
a
very good point. I forgot to mention this, but in the paper we discussed this slightly. That of course, if you come up with this implications, that of course the only thing we can observe now is once in a while these big teams play in group stages, but mainly it's then later in the in the tournament. And there are actually, I think, sometimes when there's a matchup, we hear, I think sometimes even interesting statistics, something or facts, isn't it? Something that then all of a sudden you hear something like, oh, it's the first time that Liverpool and Barcelona meet in the Champions League in the last 15 years or something like that. So that is actually a valid point with respect to does it maybe wear off this effect of so I think that's what we meant with the novelty effect. It's a good point. We cannot of course answer this with our data set.
No, thanks, Arne.
Thanks, Alex. Dennis.
Alex's point just now made me think about a different kind of a literature. So in the US, you know that Major League Baseball for most of its existence, the clubs did not play across the leagues, and now they do. And so I wonder if in a way there might be some literature about the interleague attendance or viewership that might say something useful about this novelty effect kind of issue. So anyway, I don't know if that exists or not, but I think it might be interesting to mention it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dennis. Dennis left in, so I didn't have to appeal for any further questions and comments, but I'll do it once again now. I think we can probably assume that that's a no, and that your time is all this substitute is done, Arne. So thank you very much for again just stepping in at short notice. Very interesting presentation on an interesting data set with relevant implications. So thank you once again. Thank you everyone for your contributions. We will stop now, and we'll meet again next week, February the 10th, when we've got Dave Berry from the Southern Utah University presenting Gender Bias and Perceived Quality, an experiment with elite soccer performance. So look forward to seeing you all this time next week. Thanks once again, everyone. Have a great weekend and see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Arne.
Thanks, Arno.